folder's bigger than the size of the tables here.
You know what, speaking of that,
Call
we're
meeting
see
to
right now.
order. Brenda, are you, I didn't even ask if you were ready.
I am.
Okay.
Thank you.
Called meeting to order at 6:01. All board members are present, and advisory budget committee members are present, and our senior rep is present. The date and location of the next meeting is January 9th at Belmont Middle School. First up is public communication and correspondence. Any members of the public like to give public comment?
I actually came to say I really hope that you don't consider removing 5th grade from Canterbury Elementary. I've got 3 young kids, a 2nd grader, a kindergartner, and we've had a really good experience at Canterbury Elementary so far, and I would really like for them to stay in the school as long as they can before going to middle school in Belmont. That's all.
Greta, do you have-
Can I ask your name?
Caitlin Fane.
With a C, K.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. So first, the only agenda item tonight is the budget work session. And Michael has some information that he passed out to everybody, and he's gonna walk us through it.
So Debbie and I took some time between the last meeting and this meeting to really look at the budget and make sure that all the lines were accurate, so that we're working off an accurate number this evening. So the top, you'll see that the FY '23 actual, you see the number there, the FY '24 budget, which is our current budget. And then what was presented to you on October 23rd is that $29,121,685. And then what was presented to you as an amended budget on November 28th was at $29,189,845. So we went back and we looked at it, and keep in mind, we're working in a new system right now, so there actually were some things that didn't transfer over correctly between the 10-23 budget and the 11-28 budget. So based off of what the last number you saw, which was on November 28th, we had to go in and we had to add our temporary custodial line, which was at $20,000. That didn't carry over, so we have to add that in. And then you can see that there's FICA attached to that. The step changes didn't carry over, so that's a little over $22,000. And then you can see the benefits that go along with the step change.
That's a quick question.
Mm-hmm.
So where it says 2 adds, that 51,323, that is in addition to the
Yes.
29,189?
Yep,
Okay.
we're working off that top number, 29,189. So we have to add those in. But then we also, there was a reduction in workers' comp that didn't carry over. And then some of the salaries that were in there were carried over at 5% for some reason. They were never presented to you at 5%, but they came over at 5%. So that needs to be reduced by $53,997. And then the next set of numbers are what the board approved to remove at the last meeting. Now here's the other thing that didn't carry over was the $30,000 for the consultant to help facilitate the strategic direction. So that was part of our reduction list at the last meeting. So unfortunately, that was never included in the budget that was presented to you on November 28th. So that being said, you can see that after if we were to do all of those adjustments, the adjusted budget is at $28,929,775. The default's at $28,823,292. So that means the adjusted proposed budget, if we were to make all of these adjustments, is $106,483 over the default. So if you think about that, it would be the $30,000 for the consultant as well as the CES to teacher.
Okay, I was just gonna say, I didn't actually see the consultant on this list, so.
Right. Because it actually never carried over between the October and the November budgets
Hence
that
why
presented to
you
you.
didn't put that we removed it.
Right,
I would have had to add it up
In
above
order
and
to
then
remove
remove
it.
it.
Remove it.
yeah.
So when you're talking about the CES teacher, that's the math tutor, right?
No, that's
it's
the-
fifth.
Okay.
Great. So that's not on this list right now.
Because we didn't vote to remove.
Correct.
Okay.
So right now, the budget that you're working off of is a proposed operating budget is $106,483 above the default. So we just want to make sure that you had accurate numbers going in tonight, because it's an action item to see and finalize.
Okay.
And then next is, gave you some updated revenues. We do have to make a couple more adjustments to this based on the numbers that I'm presenting to you tonight. But this includes the premium holiday for insurance, which came in as revenue. And then we have the list of the warrant articles for you to approve this evening. And then the last item is, there was a request for furniture purchases over the past 10 years. And that's what you see here, total furniture purchase and the average. So that's what you have. Consider this evening.
That page 2 on the revenues, Debbie, were these numbers already factored in when you gave us the potential tax impact per
No,
dollar
so
value of the
the
house?
total budget would need to be adjusted. So, on the correct adjusted budget of $28,929,000,
Yeah,
which we're presenting tonight, and adding the school care premium holiday as a revenue to offset, the Canterbury tax rate impact would be 33.46% instead of 32.82, and Belmont would be 17.3 instead of 16.64.
thirty-three and what?
33.46 and 17.3.
33 point, I'm sorry.
46.
4, 6, got it.
Debbie, for the furniture, what are we proposing this year
The total amount that
for
we're,
furniture?
throughout the entire budget this year, I can tell you.
Just a second. Just a second. In the packet that we got. So the numbers are. Yeah, no.
It's gonna take me a minute to connect the
Okay.
system.
Well, I'm looking at the furniture purchases, do you happen to know of these years that you provided the numbers, which ones actually were voted into the budget for anything? So like, what years we actually gave money for the furniture purchases?
I didn't pull that information, I could have.
I was
So-
just curious to kind of see if there was like maybe a trend there.
Yeah,
Oh, like requested.
yeah, typically, I won't say without going back, I can go back and look and see what the budget was versus what was spent.
I'm just curious to see if there's any sort of like a trend in numbers as to what gets approved and what doesn't.
Yeah, the furniture.
Yeah, it wouldn't tell me what was requested, just what was approved and what was
Yeah, I
spent.
don't need to know what was requested, I'm just, you know, curiosity's sake.
And the 1920 and 2020, 2021, that was big purchases, were those also part of our ESSER, like, funds?
No, this is only general fund.
Only general fund?
Right, so
okay.
that is probably the cafeteria tables at the middle school. And so, yeah, so those would have been in the budget.
But we did purchase some things with.
We purchased stuff with ESSER, right,
Quite a bit.
right.
to back up for the furniture. If I remember correctly, the purpose of this was if we were gonna create a trust. Is that something?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're kind of all over the board. I appreciate the average, but
Oh, but that's what the whole
Right.
point of the
right.
trust is, to be a shock absorber for that. That's your baby, do you wanna?
What's that?
Yes, that's your baby, do you wanna,
So
Yeah,
the,
and I think we should.
the furniture requests in the proposed budget is $52,070.
For this year.
That's the proposed in '25.
Thank you.
I don't-
52,070?
Yes.
I don't think I ever envisioned the trust to be the full, to be used for the full amount of the budget, just like buildings and grounds, we still budget buildings and grounds, we still budget technology, the trust is there to help keep those spikes from happening, basically. So, I'm inclined to add a warrant article to create it, but I'm not necessarily saying to pull the full 53,000, whatever that number was, out the full amount, anyway.
So would we be looking to create an ad, let's say like 20,000, for
Yeah.
argument's sake, out of the unused funds of this year? So then that would decrease that 15 to 30 and we would bump it, okay.
No, I know that. I'm sorry, we're having a conversation here. I understand the trust discussion. What I'm not clear about is funding that. Is that in addition to this budget, or is there someplace in this budget where that money's coming to fund the trust?
So what they're talking about is the expendable trust fund
Yeah,
would be funded from unexpended year-end funds.
Okay.
So the reserve, the fund balance at year-end,
yeah,
like we do for the capital, for the buildings and grounds and
Right.
for the technology, it first comes from unused funds at the end of the year,
Okay.
fund balance.
so you're
That's
not,
what they're
you're not talking about adding another line item to
Correct.
fund it?
Right. So I think the discussion is if they do create an expendable trust fund, let's say they wanna put $25,000 into it, then they might go in and remove some of the money from the proposed budget, I'm thinking is what you probably would do.
That's what it sounds like to me.
Right.
Okay.
I mean,
What else can we
I don't know if this makes sense, but one option is you create the expendable trust for $25,000, and you cut, I don't know, 10 or 15,000 out of the budget, so that that new expendable trust, if it passes, will help
Yes.
fund. You can't empty it necessarily, because you're kind of defeating the purpose of it, but
Right.
you can use a little bit of, just throwing numbers out there, that's one idea.
what if the first year, if we funded it out of, what's the term they use?
Unreserved fund
Unused
balance.
revenues, or unused fund balance. If we just funded it for the first year out of that, left the furniture request this year alone, then we would have that for next year to use as we, you know,
Yeah.
as we need, or if we use part of it and continue to,
Or it's more
continue to fund it, or, but at the very least, it won't have an additional tax impact, if we just, you know, fund it out of the excess for year one.
Yeah, that's certainly one idea.
The two questions I have is there typically enough money left over at the end of the year, or are you pretty close to zero at the end of the year? So if you say, hey, we're gonna put $25,000 into this trust fund, and there's $5,000 left that's already potentially allocated to another trust fund, you could potentially be putting zero into your
Correct.
fund. I just wanted to kind of put that out there. And then the other one is, these years where you had large purchases, 19, 20, 2021, and then the following year you had a really lax, this is, I mean, a $52,000 purchase, I'd imagine the next 2 years it would potentially be light. I would hope.
So those larger purchases were for specific things like
Yeah.
cafeteria tables, those are more expensive items.
Right,
So one year we did replace the cafeteria tables at the middle school.
right.
One year we had purchased all new folding chairs and chair carts, so it wasn't necessarily because we were trying to, they didn't match up one to one. So it wasn't a, we're gonna cut next year because we spent more this year kind of thing.
I just saw the big purchases and
Yeah.
then a very light year. I don't know if that was just because it got taken out or if it was just, hey, we made all our big purchases, we don't need to make big purchases.
21-22 was the year that we used ESSER funds to purchase furniture,
Gotcha.
so we didn't pull
So
from
you
the
didn't have
operating
to,
budget. We
okay.
did a significant purchase out of grant monies that year. That's why it's only $2,000.
Get back to your first question, I don't remember in the many years I've been on the board not having unexpended funds that could cover those warrant articles.
Okay.
But I guess the other thing Michael and Debbie might say is, in recent years, you've done a better job of hiring and keeping people. So we have, in the past, we've had a lot of money that was unexpended, but a lot of it was based on, I think, positions that didn't get filled, so the salary and benefits that weren't being used. I don't know if we're gonna have that situation.
I just didn't know, I mean, if you're already purchasing all this kitchen equipment for many thousands of dollars, that I feel like it's a little bit more of a gamble that you're gonna have a big pot left over. That I just wanted
And the other
to.
thing is, the order of these
Safety
makes a
obvious.
difference too.
So the kitchen equipment is out of the retained fund balance,
Okay,
which doesn't really have anything to do with the, fund balance that we
Okay.
would anticipate at the end of this year. And we have typically had a very large fund balance, especially the last 2 years, because we couldn't hire anyone.
okay.
But our fund balance is the lowest we've had, unreserved, was $208,000, and that was in 2012, 2013. It's usually higher than that.
So where does that retained balance show on these sheets? As I understood, you told me we get to keep it for a year.
Right, so
And
at
then
the end
somehow
of
it's
the
gotta
year.
either go back to the taxpayers or.
Yep, so at the end of the year, whatever we haven't used from the retained balance will go back. At this point, I have no idea if that projection is going to be the 800,000 minus the food service equipment, or if there's gonna be other things that are gonna come up. So we generally don't predict how much of that retained fund balance is gonna go
Well, I
back.
wasn't thinking of the dollar amounts. What I'm a little bit confused is when you finish the, what are we, 24 right now, 23, 24?
Yep,
So when that year finishes, if there's an excess, the retained balance, I thought you got to keep it for a year. I thought that's what we voted on a few years back, right?
so we get
When I say
to,
you, I mean the board. but-
right, so the board can determine how much they're going to keep up to it's a calculation.
Right.
And then they have to start all over again, 0. So at the end of this coming year, for 23, 24, I can recalculate how much they can retain. And then we have to see if there is unreserved fund balance.
So what happens to the money? I mean, the taxes have been collected.
Yep,
What happens to that? Does it somehow end back with the taxpayers? Are you able to credit for the, in this case, 25, 20?
it'll go back against the 24, 25 fiscal year.
It
when we do the
offsets the.
calculations,
it-
right.
it-
Yeah, to
it
offset
offsets
this
the
budget
property
we're
tax.
Right.
talking about now,
Right.
right?
No, the taxes.
Oh, it off, yeah,
Goes back
okay.
to the
Correct.
towns.
Yeah, okay, I
Right.
got you, I
Not,
got you.
not to,
Okay.
Yeah, it would be added to that revenue, which then reduces
That's
what
what I
the
meant.
towns have to
Yeah,
collect,
yeah, yeah.
yes.
Okay. Got it.
but we did, last year, we cut some assistant positions and just because we were having such high, lots of leftover money, so we were trying to do better with budgeting, so that there wasn't all this money left over. So I guess if we do establish a trust fund for the furniture, I guess the other thing is, for me, more than the actual trust fund, is that there be some sort of replacement plan, because I don't get a sense of, like, we'd have to project out what we're replacing.
We need to come up with a schedule essentially.
That's right, with any of these trust funds?
Yeah, and in general, I know that Mr. Hill and Mr. Pope have, in general, a replacement cycle on the furniture. 2 classrooms a year. So there is a basic replacement cycle in 2 of the schools, but we have to establish a more formal replacement cycle.
I'm a planner as much as everybody, and I wanna say, this table's gonna last 20 years, we're gonna replace it in 20 years, but there's so much furniture, there's so many different types of furniture, quality, like.
I totally get it.
feels
but-
hard to really say, have everything organized out.
Well, but if we get to a point where, let's say the trust fund gets up to $75,000 or $100,000, if we're warranting it out, every year, we can decide as a board to not warrant it out that year because we simply don't need it.
Correct.
I mean, even if we're going on the replacement, or on a replacement schedule,
Yeah.
I mean, we may find ourselves in a year where we don't need it, or we may find ourselves in a year where we need to supplement it.
So the purpose of the warrant, if I think I'm following this conversation, is that's money that can now be set aside independent of retained funds with the formula you're mentioning, right?
Correct.
Okay, got it.
So, and the other thing, and Sean mentioned this, but just to highlight it, the order matters. So, I think, Andrew, your point, say we end the year with, I'm making this up, but say we end the year with 200,000. If, once you get to the expendable trust, actually, I guess we'd start with equipment purchase,
No,
so.
that's separate. That's not coming out of fund balance.
Oh, right, okay, yeah, right.
You have to raise.
So then, starting with Article 4, the 150,000 for school facilities and grounds, right now, Article 5 is technology expendable trust. So those two, if we had 200,000, would get funded first, and then if we had no money left, which would give you about 30,000, I don't know what you would do here.
Article 6.
Right, in Article 6 for 20,000, these would all be funded if you had
Right.
200,000 left, correct?
Yeah, and then if you had the other article to put money into a furniture expendable trust, up to, say, $30,000, if you only had 10,000 left, only 10,000 would go in.
So, but the order matters, so
Right.
if you switched the order, it changes what gets funded first.
I think it goes last, personally. I just want to be.
So first, do we want the furniture expendable trust?
Can I just ask you a question on the furniture? So, are you looking for the furniture trust to be typical furniture that they're asking for and it just keeps getting knocked out? And then any emergency type furniture would come out of the budget itself? Or are you looking for that fund to be more emergency type furniture needed?
I think emergency is a strong word. I mean, I was thinking more like, if next year had a big, science tables or whatever that are expensive, we could say, we realize they need to be replaced, but boy, that's a big expense. Maybe we could dip into the expendable trust for part of that cost. But I don't know. I mean, I go back and forth with what Michelle said about planning. Like, I wish there was a plan like we knew on the other CIPs, we have a schedule. I just don't know how easy that's gonna be with furniture.
So, yeah, what you're saying makes sense on thinking about it. The expendable trust is trying to flatten things, and seems like you do need a replacement plan.
Michael, you have something?
Yeah, so if an emergency purchase, we could utilize a retained fund balance if that was the case. I couldn't understand what an emergency furniture purchase would look like. But if that was the case, we could go to the retained fund balance and use that in case of an emergency.
Heidi, are you asking us to define what we're considering furniture? Like
I guess
Like,
I'm
is
just
it
trying to
classroom furniture?
understand
Is it-
what would come out of the budget versus what would come out of the retained, because I guess I'm just trying to understand, you're not looking to put furniture in the budget, you're trying to pull it now just from the fund, or?
I think to Mark's point, he said, we would potentially leave what's in the budget right now, the $50,000+. This would set up a trust fund that we would utilize like we do building and grounds as well as technology, establish somewhat of a capital improvement plan for furniture purchases where a certain percentage comes out of this trust fund and a certain percentage comes out of the operating budget year after year.
So why
it's
not-
For planning purposes.
Except for small purchases is something that really is more difficult to foresee, back to your point and, Sean's point, sorry, I have a darn time with names. Why not look at an actual replacement cycle, so you're really not funding in the annual budgets furniture? I mean, I realize for a little while you're gonna have to do that to get the trust fund built up, but I just wonder, in part, if that would take a little bit of the burden off your administrative staff every year arguing for money, as opposed to, let's just kind of figure out a replacement cycle and, you know, maybe update it every other year or something. I don't know how much time it takes people to go request this, and the board kicks it around, and then some of it they get, and some of it they don't.
I think we'd set up the replacement cycle and take the newly established trust into consideration.
Yeah.
So each year, again, we would say, this is the percentage we're gonna put in the proposed operating budget, this is what we're gonna take out of the trust.
Yeah, no, I get
This
it.
sort of just sets the foundation for, a steady replacement cycle based on a capital improvement plan.
I guess I'm struggling with, I mean, I'm fine with setting it up, but I'm looking at like uniform replacement. We spend roughly $37,000 a year on uniform replacement. I'm not suggesting we not do that, but I'm just saying, like, we don't look at cutting uniforms when really I'm like, you know what? We may have to suck it up for a year, not replace uniforms, and then you're gonna say, not in a bad way, I'm not saying it a bad way, but like, well, then it just compounds itself. But it's the same thing with furniture, so I don't know how you decide why one gets a trust and one doesn't get a trust. That's, and again, I get it if they were larger purchases, but
I have the same question about Article 3 later on, but I have the same type of question. I guess my answer to you on that question would be, is furniture more expensive? Could be.
Well, the other thing is,
So maybe you could see bigger spikes in furniture than you would, say, uniforms.
well, there's spikes, and then, I don't know, Debbie, does that allow then maybe some longer term contracts if you're working with some vendor you go with, where you get some discounts because they know there's a cash flow that they can expect? I don't know whether there's enough money here to.
Yeah, that would
Buy
only be,
somebody.
that would be some kind of a lease arrangement, and that wouldn't be for this. But we have
Well, I don't know
vendors
what the
that
rules
we,
are in public finance, but it doesn't have to be a lease arrangement. I mean, in a way, you have to commit, that's true, so.
correct,
you know.
yeah, I mean, but we'd have to have a non-funding for them to hold the prices. We have furniture vendors that we use typically,
Yeah,
and we do get discounts,
okay.
but they're certainly not gonna lock a price in for 5 years.
That just kind of goes back to your and Michelle's conversation you're having back and forth.
Well, part of it is the athletic uniform, they came and worked to set it up, so it would be a fairly stable amount.
no, so I was wrong. So some are uniforms, some are supplies, which are different, so. You know, we spend $18,000 a year, give or take. I'm just trying to figure out when you establish trust and when you don't establish trust. That's the only reason I brought it up. I'm okay with going this route with the trust. I just think I personally think there will be things that need to put in place.
I'm looking at the average, it's not a huge dollar amount,
Right.
really. Like with furniture, like the cafeteria tables, like we have it on our CIP for buildings and grounds. To me, it's like if there's a dollar amount like tables that are over $20,000 or whatever it may be, maybe it needs to go to that CIP or move to it, like be budgeted differently. Because this just doesn't, I hate that we cut it every time, but it's not a huge dollar amount.
Well, I think that's the issue. At this point, we're trying to nickel and dime $100,000. Like,
Right,
a
but
lot
I mean,
has
like
been
big
cut.
purchases, like the risers or whatever we're looking for this year, that was a bigger dollar amount, which is a bigger part of this 52,000 this year, which is totally needed. But I guess I'm trying to figure out why the tables show up here, but they're also in our CIP for buildings and grounds.
So the cafeteria tables are different, and they would come to buildings and grounds, because all of your cafeteria fixtures are part of your buildings and grounds. It doesn't fall under regular education, you know, like your music risers would. You know, it's part of the cafeteria, which is buildings and grounds.
so it's specific coding.
Right.
I don't feel strong enough for this to drag out for.
Right. Well, I don't,
I think the fact that we've gotten this down to $100,000 is impressive.
so the first question is, do we want to set up a furniture expendable trust? Because that's what we were talking about. Sorry, I just,
No.
I don't think we need it either.
I
I say
feel the
yes.
same way.
I think it's reasonable, but I also have, I mean, I understand your question, and maybe that's the road that we go. You know, where we start warranting out, you know, different things, and the community votes to fund it or not. But I think a trust for furniture, especially something that's gonna be reoccurring, is a reasonable path.
I don't feel strongly enough about it, so if the no's have it, then I'm fine with
Do we have to vote?
that. No.
Did you weigh in?
I didn't, I'm not sure I feel that strongly about the trust either. However, I do think that maybe we can request that the teachers start kind of keeping track of some of their items so that we can get a better idea of what truly is needed. So I don't know, maybe that's something that we kind of revisit once we have a little bit more information that way.
It would be for next year.
Right, like for next year.
So you're a no. Did you, I'm a no, so
Not really strong, feels very strongly.
you're a yes. No, you're a yes.
Well, yeah, sure, I'm a yes, I think it's a reasonable path, but I'm not jumping up and down screaming that we have to do it.
So where are we at?
I think if you don't have really a strong
Yeah.
opinion in favor of
Let's
it,
move on.
we move on.
Okay, moving on, unless you have a really strong,
It's the board's decision.
I could go either way, right? So if you do always have this money left over that you're always giving back, it is an opportunity to capture some of that, so that way it kind of stabilizes your furniture planning for the next year. So that's really the only thing I see, it just every year you're like, well, do we do this, do we not do this budget? Now at least it's kind of, well, that money is already there, you've captured a little bit of it, and then I feel like it takes a little bit of the pressure off of you, because now you have this little pot. You may not have to fund it with a ton of money, but at least it's flattened out some. So if you do have a $50,000 year, well, all right, we can you can leverage that a little bit and make it a $30,000 year. So then you could potentially help with your overall budget, because it seems like you're always kicking back, and I'd like to see the money come back to the town too, but I feel like it would help overall with flattening out your peaks and valleys. If there's a year that you're light on furniture, then maybe you don't warrant the $15,000 or $20,000, but at least you've kind of created that. And I feel like it's a better use of your money to have a trust fund for furniture than a land trust fund. If you were gonna look at something that you ever wanted to get rid of, I'd get rid of that land trust fund way ahead of not establishing at least the furniture. The furniture is a very real thing. The land, yeah, you may or may not expand, but you do know every year you have this furniture expense. That's my thought on it.
so I'm with Alice about getting more data on what's the replacement cycle on things.
I think that'll help us get a better picture of, I mean, I understand that these teachers and administrators aren't asking for things that they don't need. I understand that, but I think kind of having a schedule like that might help us better understand, where the most need might be. That'll help us kind of determine.
Sounds good.
So would you need that ahead of creating your trust? Just because I feel like you're up against kind of a
That was
deadline.
my idea, but I mean,
Cause I don't know that you can wait another week to get information on what you're
No.
getting.
Oh,
It'd be-
no,
it'd
it'd
be
be for
for
next
following.
year.
Yeah, that would be for next year.
Okay, I just wanted to,
Yeah, no,
just wanted to
good
put
question.
that.
Don't worry, we're not meeting next week.
Yeah.
Everybody's available the 25th.
Okay, so let's look at budget. And Randy's comment, back to Randy's comment, that said we're 106, you know, done great, but she wasn't at the last
It
meeting.
wasn't.
Down to 106,000. Did you send her this form?
Yep.
Not that you recommended it, but for
She did.
the submission. Thank you. So, I will say again that I am not in favor of cutting fifth grade from Canterbury Elementary School. I think for the board to make a decision to cut fifth grade, a sweeping decision like that, I'm not talking about a teacher, so I know the teacher is tied to this position, but I don't think we should do that.
I am also not in favor of cutting the fifth grade from Canterbury.
As am I.
Can I make a suggestion? So, what's the harm in bringing a budget forward, proposed budget that's $106,000 over default, let the voters vote on it? If it goes to a default, then we come back to the table, the board comes back to the table to figure out the $106,000. You got a solid budget here in front of you.
I was gonna motion for it, but then Michelle talked about it.
Well, I just wanted, because I last time said right off the bat I was not in favor of it, so. A week hasn't changed my mind.
I would agree with that. I did a little bit more research into, about the class size, because I was surprised to hear that 8 kids had already committed to leaving. I was a little confused by that, because like for my class, we had a big class, but we only had like 2 or 3 kids leave. And so I am definitely not in favor of cutting the position. I think it needs to stay, but there is something to say for having such a small class that can have a negative impact on those students, and those students don't have a voice in this situation. So I think in the future, definitely not for this budget, and definitely not for big, like regular size classes. That fifth grade is really valuable, but I think if you only have 6 kids in your class, and all of their other friends are moving up to the middle school, that may have a negative impact on it. So I think, like, this is I'm a senior, I won't be here next year, so I think that's just something that the board should have a conversation about in the future if, like, we keep having this sort of pattern of such a small fifth grade, just something to keep in mind.
And I think to Kate's point, if you keep that teaching position at CES, we keep talking about fifth grade, I mean, we talk about fifth grade. There could be a year that you need 3 kindergarten classes, and then you don't have that, you don't have an additional teacher to work with, where you're gonna be putting in the budget right now, so I just sort of piggyback on what Kate's saying.
I didn't follow that, Michael.
So it's.
No, I mean, I understood what you said, but every year the board can decide on, and your recommendation for, you know, if we need to add staff. So right now, you know, I agree you don't have a perfect crystal ball, but, you know, using your example, kindergarten increasing, I would think you'd have reasonable information to tell you going into the school year and the budget cycle to know if you needed to staff.
You actually wouldn't.
That's
You
not,
wouldn't,
That's-
okay.
yeah, that's
So-
challenging, I'm sorry, Michelle, go ahead.
The position that's in here right now was put in after the budget, once we got kindergarten numbers.
Okay. I
So
mean, I wasn't
that's-
arguing to cut this
No, I'm
particular
just telling you,
position.
that's the challenge with numbers.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Because we have large, my understanding, large kindergarten numbers in Canterbury, large first grade and second grade.
So I was thinking about this over the weekend, and I kept thinking about the math tutor. So when Aaron presented the data on the math tutor, that class was a big class that was split in 2. Then they were put back into 1, and then that's when they started to decline. So I too was thinking that if something does happen with the 5th grade, could we repurpose that teacher? Because there's big classes coming behind it, and to, like, 20.
So if we were to talk about math, and I don't want to derail the board much, but as you know, I've helped a couple of students, so it's a small population. I gotta tell you, I've been surprised that sophomores, juniors, and seniors, where we're having to back up and talk about fractions before we can talk about geometry or algebra. Every single one of them. Maybe it just happens to be the ones that need the help, but I was talking to you, I just don't know how somebody gets to that level, and we're talking third grade math. I only mention that
Right.
later discussion, if that is actually a little more pervasive and that's why a tutor needed to be, that's a different discussion.
I also, do we know how many fifth grade teachers there are at BMS?
Total 5.
Because there's 73 students enrolled in fifth grade at BMS, so if the need arises, well, I mean, and I know that this changes year to year, would we be able to, I mean, I'm assuming there's some sort of reciprocity between the two schools where we can borrow a teacher if we need to.
Well, it doesn't quite work like that, does it?
I mean, you look at your overall teaching staff and who's teaching what, and if you have to repurpose a position to a different building, it's something that can happen, it's just not something that would happen on a regular basis. It would be
I
an
was gonna say, cause I
anomaly.
saw that happen last year
It'd be
too.
an anomaly, yeah.
The fifth grade teacher was moved to BMS
Mhm.
from Canterbury, so I'm assuming that that's a thing that can happen.
Yeah, that's filling a vacancy.
So she
So,
chose.
yeah, she
Okay.
chose to fill that vacancy.
So I'm hearing Randy say, let the voters decide. Is that what I heard you say with the 106 over?
Yeah, so and that doesn't include a cut position, right? That's pretty good. It's really good. That's close. And if you look at everything that we're contractually obligated to do, so the fact that the things that were cut above and beyond that, it's kind of sad if you think about it, but that's really close. So I'm gonna say motion to accept or proceed with the proposed budget of $20,929,775.
Second. Go ahead and second it.
So just to be clear, I know we talked about letting the voters decide, default budget, proposed budget. But there also is a step before that where I realize not many people are gonna show up. But if we hear feedback at these public hearings,
Yeah.
I think we owe it to look at the budget again, because there's a whole second step of looking at the budget after the public hearings to decide what we move forward with after that.
Correct.
I just don't wanna forget that step.
Very true.
Other thoughts? Actually, we need to swing back to this, but our public hearing is the 10th, right? The 10th,
We have a meeting the 9th?
yes, and then we have public hearing the 10th. And the last day to finalize the budget is the 18th, because we have a snow day on the 16th.
Can we move our meeting to the 11th? Should be a Thursday, right? So if we meet on Tuesdays.
Well, hold on, let's, before we jump to
That's
that.
right, we have a motion on the table.
We have a motion on the table, a second, and we're discussing. So I'm just curious, I know there are a couple who really wanted to be at the default budget or below, so I'm just curious.
I mean, I think by proposing a budget that's higher than the default, we are giving everybody that voted for SB2 reason to vote for SB2. But I get it. I mean, I think that's one option. I've gone back and forth in my own head about how, I've heard people say you don't give people an option when you propose a budget below the default. Yeah, that's true too. I get both sides of it. I also think that we should be getting this information out as soon as possible, including tax information, and we should be listening to the people in the two towns to discussed again after the public hearing.
Right, I agree.
To speak to what Jay's original point was with what the compound increases are going to be over, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 year run. I don't think that we listen to a lot of the taxpayers.
Other thoughts?
I like this proposed budget. I do worry though, with such a huge bump in taxes, it's gonna be very hard to sell somebody on $100,000 greater than budget. And I fear that you're gonna miss out on some of like the realized benefit things like this, the specialist that you would be bringing in-house instead of contracting the services and things like that, so I hope it gets accepted. That way, some of those cost savings would be realized. That's all.
$106,000 is what, fractions of a penny?
The issue for me isn't the 106,000, it's the actual, even if we're at the default, isn't our percentage increase
It's the
high?
2 million.
It's huge.
Yeah,
It's
3 million.
the $2 million
Yeah, $2
loss in
million.
revenue that's causing in
Correct.
Canterbury a 34% increase in tax rate.
And
Projected,
there's my-
estimated, based on current revenues.
Which is why I think it's gonna be very hard to sell a budget that's $100,000 more. I hope that people realize the work that went into it and that there are, there is good in there and that there is these other things that teachers ask for being accepted, but
Well, I think
I just think it's gonna be hard.
I think, Michelle, to your point, if somebody does the math, it's peanuts. The real issue is the revenue cuts and the default budget.
Correct.
So, as we talk next year, that's where I think, depending on the feedback you get, that's gonna be a discussion, may take more than just a couple months before the budget cycle.
And that's where, like, I mean, I'm fine with moving this forward, but I think the larger is, we've gotta do something, because a 34% increase. Like, even if we got down to the default budget, we're still dealing with a giant increase.
Yeah,
So that's the piece that is making me think, like, then let's just move this forward, because unless we cut, I mean, what are we gonna cut? I'm not willing to cut positions right now without us having a real conversation
Right.
about it. And really looking at what we wanna do moving forward. I'm not talking about the 5th grade, I'm talking across the board, and I'm proud of the education we are giving our kids here, and I don't wanna cut that.
so not this budget cycle, to your point, I think your point's valid, $106,000 if you do the math. I would sit there and go, of course, I've been part of these discussions, so I don't know what would really affect me to come in with a proposed budget over default, knowing the differences myself, but, so you let the voters decide. I mean, it's a pretty good shot they're gonna vote for the lower number, but, you deal with it when they do. But I would really encourage the board early into next year and figure out where you're gonna carve into and not wait till September to look at the harder question. And at the end of the day, when you do the analysis, you may be exactly where we are, and that's the answer, but at least you'll know you've really looked at it, and you can say, it's the cost of doing business.
I think it's gonna be very important to focus on what the tax rate has been for the last 5 or 6 years, because the more we've turned back, it has kept the tax rate down. And this is very similar, in my opinion, to what happened when, for years, the New Hampshire retirement system kept the employees paying 5%, and they adjusted the employer's share to come to a total number that they needed. So some years we paid less than 3%, some years we paid, 4%, and then all of a sudden, the state said, whoa, you've got to turn this around because you're not gonna have enough money to fund the retirees in the future. And that's when they did actual calculations, and now we're up to 19% that we're paying on teachers, because it was an unfunded pool. Well, the problem is, we've had these huge fund balances. We've turned them back because we couldn't find people. We have to turn them back. And now it's catching up to us. You know, we've lost $2 million in revenue, that if we hadn't lost that revenue, it wouldn't be showing as a huge tax rate change. And that's the big problem. The state's revenue's gone down, Canterbury's have to pay more in statewide property tax, and we don't have fund balance to send back.
But I agree completely with everything you said, but you do realize there are people out there that just don't care what you say.
Oh, I know.
Like,
It's
all
not-
I care about is my taxes, and
Right.
the schools keep causing it to go up, and they don't necessarily listen or understand, or,
Right.
I mean, I think this whole, public hearing, I mean, I think we need to make a concerted effort to better explain that, and I actually don't think Debbie should be explaining it, the board should be.
So if you were to explain it, that's an interesting point. Is there anything that prevents you from putting out in the literature, or maybe you do and people just don't know it, maybe you highlight it? I mean, yes, the change in the revenues is definitely an impact. And that, you know, I try to make that clear, and maybe some of us letters and stuff can help people understand. Part of this problem you're gonna have to take back to the legislature.
I do think if we move forward, actually whatever budget we move forward with, we do have to listen when people come to the hearing, if they're, like, we may end up having to cut more or add more in. Not sure that's gonna happen, but it could. I've seen it happen, so I just, nickeling and diming it down to the default budget isn't gonna get me where I would feel comfortable about my tax rate. So that's where I'm coming from. What do you think, Heidi?
I think we should move forward with the adjusted budget as presented, not the tax rate.
Jen?
I'm good.
I agree with that.
I have a question. Before we vote,
Yeah?
you need to answer why we are creating Article 3. Because although I agree with it, why aren't we doing that? Why are we doing that for desk? Why aren't we doing that for other things? So I kind of, I like this model, as long as we don't become a town with 75 warrant articles. But I think we need to, before we vote on the total budget, be able to answer that question. Why are we doing this for equipment purchase for exercise equipment? Why aren't we just putting that in the budget? Somebody's gonna ask that question, we should be able to answer that.
Also, now that we know that order matters, why does that become a higher priority than,
The order only matters for the expendable trusts.
okay. Perfect. Thank you.
I'm not looking to put it back in the budget, but I think that we have to answer that question, because I'm looking through this over the weekend, I'm like, yeah, why don't we do that for everything? Like, you have to be able to explain it. Or we can just
I
move forward
can't
and
answer.
compare it. Because
Was it the last meeting that we discussed, that we moved it to here, or was it 2 meetings ago, or?
Last
It
meeting.
was the last meeting,
Okay.
and it was Michael's suggestion.
So you're reducing the budget by $21,000, the total cost to replace the equipment in the exercise room is $43,000. So you're reducing the budget, it's an item to reduce it by 21. But then on the other hand, you have an opportunity, voters have an opportunity to vote on actually doing the entire project.
does
compared to a
the
2-year
board
timeframe.
value Article 3 less than everything that's in Article 2? That's a valid question.
Yes. I do.
Say it again.
Does the board value Article 3 less than everything that's in Article 2?
I would say yes.
So that's how we could explain it. We think it's important, but we weren't going to put it in the budget. We don't want to tax it.
That's why I thought you guys did that.
Well, I think it's also, we weren't sure, that was something that had been talked about cutting. So you're saying like, the board wants the voters to decide if this is something that our school should have and that we should pay for. Because it could have just been taken out altogether.
But the hard part, Kate, is what I think Sean's also asking is there's other stuff that we're cutting. So like, why did we not?
Warrant
But
bulk
that's,
things.
warrant that
We
stuff.
could warrant more, and that's just not typically how I've
Right.
seen it done.
Yeah, so both sides, we cut stuff that we could have warned, we put stuff in the budget, we didn't warrant, why didn't you just warrant that instead?
Right.
Is this gonna set a precedent that anything over a certain dollar amount we should be doing this for?
That's up to future boards, I guess. I didn't want to take much time with it, just,
We've also talked about this weight room, I mean,
Years.
year after year.
And now we have
Like-
classes using it again, and they really can't use it, so there's something to be, I'm making,
It just seems like
wanted
an
an
easier
argument,
option.
Sean, I'm trying to give you a reason, I don't know.
Alright, I have one other question. I
Okay.
don't think this is budget related, but I'm gonna, it's part of the whole process. Where do we land on the land expendable trust and dissolving it?
It's not an expendable trust,
Oh, I mean,
the capital reserve.
capital reserve. So, if we dissolved it and something great opened up a year from now, couldn't we just, I mean, timing would be an issue, I guess, but we could just propose to create a land capital reserve. Yeah,
Or could we use retained fund? If we had no other way to pay for it?
Or
Not-
just,
Not
just
for
leave,
land purchase.
just leave $1 in it, and then it stays.
I
don't-
thought we
don't
couldn't put
completely
it down to
dissolve it.
$1.
I may be mistaken, but I don't think you can take any money out of that trust unless it is specifically for a land
That's
purchase.
what I
So I
heard.
don't
It's
think you
either
can
for-
lose just $1.
Right, it's either specific for a land purchase or you dissolve it.
And preferably, I'd like to keep it and dissolve it down to, or reduce it down to $1, but
Can we rename it? Rainy day fund?
No, we need to dissolve it and then establish a new one.
Like with a vote, like to
Highly illegal.
repurpose it to
No.
a rainy day fund?
So if we dissolved it, then what would we do with those monies?
The money goes back as revenue to the taxpayers.
Okay,
it's not
Which
much,
then
it's not gonna
could
make a difference.
potentially fund your warrant article for furniture.
Not really,
No, you can't work it that way.
no, because it becomes part of revenue in the following year.
Okay.
What's that?
just leave it alone. 27 grand? Leave it alone.
That would've been nice.
I mean, I wanna add more fields, but
You wanna what?
I don't know if I should say that.
Do what? Oh, add
No,
more
not
fields.
on- not on
Is that
YouTube
what you
anyway.
said?
Potentially, yeah, if something opened up that border.
Oh, athletic fields?
Yeah.
Right, for
I
land,
agree.
is that what you're talking about?
I'm not in the habit of giving up land.
Correct me if I'm wrong though, Debbie, on this
Land
one.
capital reserve.
Let's say that they dissolve, the voters vote to dissolve that reserve. It goes back the next year as revenue.
Correct,
Does it show as a loss of revenue 2 years out?
yes.
2 years.
So you're back at showing a loss of revenue because you gave monies back.
Yeah.
Just hold on to it.
Okay, so,
We have a motion on the table.
I know, any other questions?
No.
Can I just
Yep.
ask a question? Where
Yes.
are we getting the 42,000 for the exercise room? I thought it was 21,000,
We're gonna do it in a two-year
Yeah.
phase.
so 21,000.
42 is the initial quote to do the whole room.
Okay.
So we're gonna, in order, we didn't put the full 42 in, we'll replace some equipment the first year, and then the second year we put in the
And so the warrant is
do the whole room.
do it or not do it. Any other questions? Okay, we'll call the vote. All those in favor of the motion as presented, which is the 29,929,775.
28.
What did I say?
29.
Oh, I increased us $1 million. Let's not do that. 28,929,775 to move that budget to public hearing. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed?
No.
Abstention? Motion carries. Okay.
Have we selected talking points yet?
No, so that's supposed to be today too. Oh,
You need to approve the warrants.
yeah. So the warrants, We also have to talk about timing that Sumner brought us at the last meeting. But first, the warrants. Articles 1 through 6.
Motion to move forward with Articles 1 through 6 as presented.
Second.
Discussion that we haven't already had? Or want to discuss again? All those in favor of the motion as presented, do so by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstention? Motion carries. Okay, the other piece, before we get to who's doing what, is our moderator, it's moderator, right? Came to us and brought forward 2 things for our consideration, which we said we would talk about tonight. One was having the public hearing, no, the deliberative session in Canterbury on a week, and the second one was on a weekend. And this really stemmed from the withdrawal study committee. We asked to wait until it went to the state board. The state board did not approve the withdrawal plan.
And Sumner did reach out to Debbie and said basically pulling that request because of the state board's decision. Correct? Am I correct in that?
Correct.
The Saturday request or the having Canterbury request?
But he said there was no sense moving it to Canterbury or having it on Saturday.
Why pulling the Saturday?
He only had it on, he had requested on Saturday because he thought if the state board approved the withdrawal, there'd be more people that would be coming out.
No, I know, but separate from that, do y'all think that there might be better turnout for the public hearing on a Saturday, or it wouldn't make any difference?
The deliberative, you mean?
Or the deliberative, yeah. Honestly, it'd be nice to get better attendance.
The only way to get better attendance is to go back to a traditional town meeting.
If what?
Go back to a traditional town meeting is only way you're gonna get better attendance.
I mean, me personally, Wednesdays and Saturdays are the worst, so I'm stuck either way, I think. I think it's worth the discussion of trying to get as many people.
When's the
Nice.
town's deliberative, do we know? Belmont's.
It's a Saturday's one.
Yeah, it definitely has a lot larger attention than the school one, and the school's a bigger budget, so it's kind of strange.
It's the first Saturday that, there's only 2 Saturdays that we could have deliberative
Well,
sessions.
that's why I.
And theirs is the first one.
Yeah.
Sometimes it means pretty bad.
Saturday, January
It's still a
28th.
fraction of the voters.
It's always my birthday, and I have school.
So theirs is February 3rd, which means we would have to do the 10th. If we were gonna do a Saturday.
Of February.
Yes. Because you have that one window to get the,
I really, really don't want to do February 3rd, for some reasons.
well, that's theirs, that's the
What's
town's, that's the town's.
Oh, I was thinking like later on that day.
Yeah.
Everybody's more now.
Is there appetite for people moving it?
What day is it usually on, a Friday?
On a Wednesday.
It's on a
Wednesday,
Wednesday?
Wednesday at 6.
Abs-
I, go ahead.
No, I prefer weeknights versus weekends, only because of family schedules. That's
I feel like if
personal.
people came to us and said they wanted it on a Saturday, but I guess we're not asking either, so I don't know.
I mean, it comes up
Opportunity
occasionally.
for a survey.
Huh? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, every once in a while, somebody will bring it up, but it's by the onesies, it's pretty small.
I prefer the weeknights myself.
Yeah. I'm not seeing an appetite for changing it. Okay.
7th.
Whatever is on Debbie's schedule.
Our deliberative session is the
The seventh.
seventh.
Oh, the other, now we'll go back to Randy, what I told her. So the 7th is deliberative.
So January 10th was public hearing. We have a board meeting January 9th, but we discussed that we may have to reconvene after the public hearing. So does it make more sense to move that January 9th to after the public hearing?
To the 11th.
Or another day, even if it's the following week?
We meet right after the public hearing?
That's what we do every year, we meet right after the public hearing,
Oh.
schedule a board meeting right after the public hearing, take any action that the board might need to take on the budget.
Works for me.
It's only if there's major issues that you would have to come back, and it's only happened once that the board had to reschedule a meeting because there was some major changes that had to be discussed.
Works for me. You were so fast last year, I didn't remember.
Okay.
And I think that reason, Debbie, was because there was a petition warrant article that came in
Yes.
after the public hearing. So then we had to have another public hearing to make sure that was covered. And that shouldn't happen this year.
Hopefully not, because
Well-
the 9th is when the petition warrant articles are due, and the public hearing is the 10th.
You know, date for that's the 9th, so we should miss, I mean, it should come in before
Right.
our meeting.
So, are we meeting on the 9th?
Yes.
Okay.
'Cause
And
that's
then
the
a board meeting
normal-
after the 10th, on the 10th.
Right? The 9th is the
Yes.
normal
Right.
meeting.
Right.
Right.
And then the 10th is finalize the budget.
When we do this next year, can we put in the public hearing and board meeting to follow? Just so that I don't ask this again next year.
We can do that.
Is January 9th a budget meeting, or do we need to be there?
No.
It's just a regular.
I would like to take Sumner up on his offer to rearrange the location however he thinks it makes the most sense.
Yeah, seating.
I think we should really consider having the deliberative session in the cafeteria. It's got a better sound system, sort of closer proximity, so you can actually see everyone that's speaking, so I'd recommend that we move it to the cafeteria.
In Canterbury or in Belmont?
Belmont, instead of the gymnasium, use the
Yeah. Yeah, I
cafeteria
know what you're
like the
talking
town does.
That's where the town does it.
It's a lot easier to hear.
Let's do it.
Okay. All right, and now who's doing what?
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, no, we'll keep going.
So the public hearing is staying at BMS, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Next year it'll be here. Any other questions before we move to who's doing what? Okay, seeing none, Debbie,
Yes.
you have the list of who's doing what?
So, this is what happened last year. The 1100 through the 1290 Sean handled. The 1300 through the 1890 Marcel handled.
I can take that and then give Alice what I have.
Okay.
1300 through,
1890.
okay.
And then the 2110 through the 2190 Jill. The 2210 through the 2225, that's gonna be Alice. 2310 through 2490 was Jeff. 2510 to 4600 last year was Eric, so that'll be you, Mark.
25.
2510 through the 4600. And then Michelle did the subtotal general fund and the transfers,
Mhm.
and then you just decide who's gonna do the warrant articles.
But I'm gonna do, I'm gonna do the, oh no, that's at the public hearing. Right? What are we talking about? Public hearing?
Public
Sorry.
hearing.
So you're gonna put a PowerPoint together,
Yep.
right? And we'll look at it and make edits, and that's what I'm doing.
Yep.
And the public hearing book will be sent out to all of you for edits prior to us publishing it.
I promise I won't go
I
in
know
depth.
everyone's looking at us,
I promise I
so-
won't go in depth.
No, you shouldn't. You can.
You can.
Appreciate it, Alice, yeah.
Yeah,
Have
please
at it.
do.
Have at it.
Okay.
So then you just have to figure out who's gonna do what for the warrant articles.
Well, warrant article 1 is,
Well, that's the election of officers.
right, so you don't,
Yeah, the operating budget is Article 2, that would be you.
yeah.
Article 3 is the equipment purchase.
Who wants to do that?
I'll do it.
Sean?
I'll probably write something up ahead of time, so I'm prepared
Um,
and then I can speak.
4 is the facilities and grounds expendable trust. Jeff, are you gonna do that one again?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Jeff's getting really good.
VHS paving, VHS paving.
5 is the technology expendable trust.
I'll do that again.
And 6 is the food service equipment expendable trust.
I can do that one.
Perfect.
Yay.
Thank you.
Anything else?
As a resident, I find myself on some of the town pages on social media, not often, but more so than looking in newsletters and things, so I feel like it's a good way to get the word out. I'm trying to put things out there. I know I need a lot of reminders, because I seem to forget to put things in my calendar.
Yeah.
So, just saying, it helps me, and I would imagine it would probably help some other people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Would it be worth trying to do
Make it fair.
trying to do some type of a feed for the hearing? To try to get people in?
Like a TikTok video?
No,
No, like a-
food.
Oh.
Food, feed them,
Oh,
feed them.
I thought you meant like Hootie.
I thought you meant
No,
like
no.
a teaser.
No,
That's why it's like a TikTok?
Oh. Feed them?
I don't know, I mean,
Do we have money in the budget?
Yeah.
everybody says that we want, that we want people there. I don't know, there's
I'd be
no-
more worried we get like a bunch of donuts and stuff and then no one would show up and we'd have to eat them all.
Potluck? I don't know.
I happen to have a giant box of mini candy canes that I can bring.
Oh. That's a good idea, I just don't think we have money.
When Alice finishes going through the public hearing book, where is it going?
So we send them to all the schools, and we post it online. And,
Town hall?
yeah, put it in the town hall, the 2 libraries, a country store here,
So both libraries, store,
Yeah.
town hall?
Yeah. all the schools.
And you're gonna post it on, not you specifically, but the SAU will post it on social media, so then it can be shared to all these pages?
Yep.
Well, I think it gets posted that it's on the district website. We don't post the
We send a
whole
link.
No,
thing.
right, okay, yeah. But there's gonna be a Facebook post or an
Yeah.
Instagram post that then someone could share onto the pages.
I don't know if I see it, I'll repost it.
We'll get it out there.
We'd send notices to the schools so they can let people know. And what we started doing a few years ago was we PDF it and send it to all of the employees. So that way they're not snagging up the copies that are in the schools.
You done?
All right, yeah, unless there's anything else. No, no, no.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? We really